It began with a patrol that should have been ordinary. Ethan Cole and Valor, his loyal shepherd, walked the outskirts of Raven Hollow as dawn brushed gold across the mist. But the old dog, long retired from service, stopped short at the sight of an abandoned house. His hackles raised, his gaze fixed on the porch. He barked once, sharp and urgent, the kind of bark Ethan hadn't heard in years. The officer felt unease crawl through him. The house was nothing. At least, that's what the town believed. But when Ethan followed Valor's stare to the crumbling staircase, he saw it. A thin crack, almost hidden, running through the concrete like a scar. His crowbar bit into the seam, the sound of shattering stone echoing down the street. And then he saw the trapdoor. Beneath it, in the damp dark, a pair of terrified eyes blinked up at him. A little girl, bound, shaking. Her tears had stained the dirt. In that moment, Raven Hollow's facade of peace shattered, and Ethan realized the nightmare was only beginning. Morning crept quietly over Raven Hollow, a town that never seemed to belong entirely to the present. The cobblestone streets glistened faintly from a night's worth of dew, and the houses that lined them stood like weary guardians of another century. Their paint peeled in pale ribbons, shutters hung slightly askew, and ivy climbed unchallenged across weathered brick walls. The air carried the scent of damp earth and chimney smoke, a mixture that seemed to anchor the town to its past rather than guide it forward. From afar, Raven Hollow was peaceful, charming even. A stranger might remark on the stillness, on how life here seemed to drift like smoke from a wood stove. But to those who lived within its crooked lanes, the silence had weight. It wasn't the peace of contentment. It was the quiet of secrets buried deep, of stories better left unspoken. Ethan Cole knew this better than most. He walked slowly down Main Street, his boots echoing against the cobblestones. At his side, padded Valor, the once proud German shepherd who had served with him through storms both human and otherwise. Age and injury had left Valor with a faint limp, but his posture remained noble, his ears alert to every sound. Even now, long after his discharge from the K9 unit, he carried himself with the same unyielding discipline. To Ethan, Valor was more than a partner. He was the last living witness to the years that had shaped Ethan, years filled with the kind of memories that carved lines into a man's face long before his time. The morning mist swirled between them, veiling the storefronts and lampposts. Ethan pulled his coat tighter, though the cold wasn't what unsettled him. It was the memory that never loosened its grip. Years ago, there had been a boy, 10 years old, small for his age, with a smile that could light up a classroom. His name haunted Ethan still, though he rarely said it aloud. The boy had vanished on a grey morning not unlike this one. Ethan had been a young officer then, still believing that persistence and good intentions were enough to hold the world together. For weeks he had searched, through woods, along riverbanks, behind abandoned sheds, until his hands bled from pulling brambles aside. And still, the boy had never been found. Every misty morning since had carried the echo of that failure. Valor slowed, turning his head as if sensing the shift in Ethan's thoughts. His amber eyes caught the thin light of dawn, steady and grounding. Ethan reached down, fingers brushing against the thick fur at his companion's neck. "I know," he murmured, almost to himself. "It's never really gone, is it?" The dog gave no sound in reply, but his silent presence was enough. They had both lived with ghosts, Ethan with the children he couldn't save, Valor with the scars that had ended his service. Together they carried those burdens like soldiers marching under a flag no one else could see. The town stirred around them. A bakery opened its doors, releasing the faint scent of bread that mingled with the mist. An old man shuffled across the street to fetch his paper, nodding stiffly at Ethan before retreating into his porch. To the untrained eye, Raven Hollow was simply waking. But to Ethan, every creak of a shutter and every hurried glance away whispered the same thing. Something was not right beneath this town's still surface. They turned off Main Street, heading toward the outskirts, where houses grew sparse and the forest pressed closer. Here the cobblestones gave way to gravel, and the silence thickened. Ethan walked without speaking, letting the rhythm of Valor's pause steady his thoughts. Yet beneath the calm, his chest tightened. He had returned to Raven Hollow years after that boy's disappearance, telling himself it was to serve, to protect. But in truth, he had returned to atone. And mornings like this reminded him that atonement was a river with no shore. As the sun fought through the mist, its golden rays fell across Valor's fur, illuminating the silver streaks that had crept in with age. Ethan thought of the missions they had survived, the raids where gunfire cracked like thunder, the nights they had both lain awake, listening for threats just beyond the wire. Valor had saved his life more times than Ethan could count, and now, though retired, the shepherd walked as though every shadow still demanded his vigilance. They crested a small rise, and the town behind them seemed to shrink, swallowed by fog. Ahead, the road bent toward a cluster of houses, leaning under the weight of years. Most were empty now, their windows boarded or broken, porches sagging. Time had pushed this neighborhood to the margins, and the town had let it rot. Valor stopped. Ethan paused mid-step, glancing down. The shepherd's body had gone rigid, ears pricked forward, his gaze fixed on a single house at the end of the lane. It was larger than the others, its roof sagging like a tired back, its paint stripped bare by wind and rain. The yard was choked with weeds that swayed gently in the morning breeze. To anyone else, it was just another abandoned property waiting to collapse. But Valor's stance told another story. The dog's muscles coiled, every line of his frame honed to attention. His tail stiffened, his breathing changed, slow, controlled, purposeful. Ethan recognized the shift instantly. He had seen it in alleys before raids, in fields where danger lay unseen. It was the stance of a soldier who smelled the storm before it broke. A chill scraped down Ethan's spine. He scanned the yard, the porch, the dark windows that gaped like sockets. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, yet the silence was heavier here, pressing against his chest. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered, his voice steady though his gut twisted. Valor didn't move. A low growl unfurled in his throat, deep and steady, the kind of growl that warned of something not visible to the human eye. It vibrated through the morning air, cutting through the mist. Ethan swallowed, his hand instinctively brushing the badge beneath his coat. He had trusted this dog with his life for years, and Valor had never once been wrong. If he said danger was near, then danger was near. He looked back at the house, its frame sagging, its porch sinking into the earth. And yet, standing there with mist curling around his boots, Ethan knew this was no ordinary ruin. Something waited within, something that had been hiding in plain sight. The growl deepened. The silence of Raven Hollow shattered. The low growl from Valor still vibrated in Ethan's chest long after it faded. The abandoned house stood silent at the end of the lane, but Ethan's mind had already slipped somewhere else, somewhere he didn't often allow himself to go. The fog curled tighter, and in it came memories. Uninvited, but relentless. It had been 8 years ago, in another part of Raven Hollow, when a call came through the radio. A child missing. A 10-year-old boy named Daniel Mercer, last seen on his bike near the edge of the creek. His mother had called in frantic, her voice shattering over the dispatcher's calm instructions. Ethan, then only 2 years into the force, had been one of the first to respond. He could still remember the boy's room, baseball posters tacked to the wall, a shelf with tiny trophies, a backpack still unzipped on the bed. Everything ordinary, everything screaming of a life interrupted. He remembered the mother clutching a worn photograph, repeating the same words. "Please, bring him back. Please, don't let him be out there alone." Ethan had promised her. He had promised with the conviction of a man who believed promises mattered. He had no idea then how heavy those words would become. For weeks, he searched. Through the woods with the creek running cold and brown, through half-collapsed barns where the wind whistled through the boards, through basements that smelled of mold and rot. Every night he came home with mud on his boots, hope wearing thinner. The boy's bike was found tangled in brush by the water, but the boy himself, he was never seen again, and Ethan carried that absence like a wound. The case went cold, swallowed by time. People stopped mentioning Daniel Mercer's name, the town allowing silence to stand where truth should have been. But Ethan couldn't forget. He couldn't forgive himself. He had promised a mother he would bring her son home. Instead, he had given her nothing but silence. Now, standing in the mist years later, that failure pressed against him, as real as the damp air. He rubbed at his jaw, trying to shake it off, but the fog seemed to whisper Daniel's name. Beside him, valor shifted. The shepherd leaned his weight subtly against Ethan's leg, not demanding attention, but offering presence. Ethan looked down into those steady amber eyes, and for a moment, he felt understood without a word. Valor carried his own scars. The shepherd had been retired after a raid gone wrong, a blast in an abandoned warehouse. Ethan still remembered the thunderous crack of collapsing beams, the way dust turned daylight into choking darkness. When the smoke cleared, 3 men were down, and Valor limped from the rubble with a torn shoulder and a gash along his side. The vets patched him up, but the department decided his working days were over. They were both cast into silence after failure. Ethan, the boy he couldn't save. Valor, the missions cut short by injury. That was why their bond was more than handler and dog. They were 2 survivors walking the same quiet road, each the other's anchor in a world that too easily forgot. Ethan knelt and pressed his forehead briefly to Valor's. "You still hear it too, don't you?" His voice broke softer than he intended. "The ghosts of the ones we lost." Valor gave a slow blink, his breath steady, his body calm but firm against Ethan's touch. It was enough. The flashbacks came in fragments. Muddy boots, the crackle of radios, the sound of a mother's sobs. Ethan could almost feel the rough paper of the missing person flyer between his fingers, the bold letters above the boy's smiling face. Missing. He had stared at that poster until it blurred, until the smile twisted into accusation. That was why he still walked the forgotten corners of Raven Hollow at dawn. Why he never let Valor rest fully even in retirement. He wasn't patrolling just for the town. He was patrolling for the boy he'd lost. For the promise broken. And maybe, just maybe, for the chance that one day he could make it right. The mist thinned slightly as the sun rose higher, brushing the edges of the rooftops with light. But in Ethan's mind, the fog remained. He pushed himself upright, hand resting briefly on Valor's back. "Come on," he murmured. "We've got work to do." Valor gave a single low chuff, almost like agreement, and together they faced the abandoned house again. It loomed at the end of the lane, its broken shutters yawning open like blind eyes. To anyone else, it was just wood and rot. But to Ethan, to Valor, it felt like the echo of Daniel Mercer's case, like another chance to step into the shadows and refuse to turn away this time. And that was when it struck Ethan with sudden clarity. His restlessness wasn't only guilt. It was also the fear that Daniel had not been the last, that somewhere another child's voice was crying into the silence. He tightened his grip on Valor's leash. "Not again," he whispered. "Not this time." The shepherd's ears pricked, muscles taut. For a heartbeat, handler and dog stood together in the fog, both bearing scars the world couldn't see, both unwilling to let silence win again. Then, from the porch of the house at the end of the lane, came a sound, just a faint creak, almost like wood shifting under unseen weight. It could have been nothing, or it could have been everything. Valor stiffened. His growl rumbled low and certain. Ethan's pulse kicked hard in his throat. The past had returned to meet the present, and he knew he was standing on the edge of something that might either redeem him or destroy him. The lane narrowed as Ethan and Valor moved farther from the heart of Raven Hollow. Here, the houses leaned into each other like weary old men, their windows blinded by grime, their porches sagging under the weight of seasons long past. The mist thickened, curling low around Ethan's boots, making the world feel muffled and distant. Only the steady sound of Valor's paws against gravel tethered him to the present. It was supposed to be an ordinary patrol, quiet, uneventful, dawn breaking over forgotten streets. But Ethan had learned long ago that quiet was rarely innocent. Sometimes silence carried teeth. They turned a bend, and the house came into view. It stood at the edge of town, larger than the others, yet somehow more broken. Its roof sloped inward, as though the house itself had grown tired of standing. Paint peeled from its clapboards in curling strips. The porch listed dangerously to one side, a skeletal chair still clinging to its corner, as if waiting for someone who would never return. No curtains, no laughter, no light. Only the hollow gape of windows that stared back like vacant eyes. That was when Valor stopped. Ethan felt the leash tighten suddenly, pulling against his hand. He glanced down, and his stomach clenched. The shepherd had gone still, every muscle locked in perfect precision. His ears stood high, his tail frozen in a rigid line. His weight shifted slightly forward, head low, body quivering with a tension Ethan recognized instantly. It was the stance of a soldier. The years melted away, and Ethan was back in alleys overseas, back in ruined warehouses and deserted streets, where Valor's body language had been the only warning between life and death. That same posture had saved him countless times, a language of survival written in the set of a dog's shoulders and the silence before a strike. Ethan whispered, almost without thinking, "What do you see, boy?" Valor didn't move, didn't blink. His gaze was fixed on the house. The early sun pressed through the fog, painting the broken boards in pale light, but no movement showed. The yard was a jungle of weeds, thick and tangled, hiding whatever might lie beneath. A fence leaned outward, its boards gray and splintered, gaps wide enough for shadows to slip through. Ethan scanned the windows, empty. Scanned the porch, rotting. Scanned the yard, still. And yet the hair on the back of his neck rose, He trusted Valor more than his own eyes. His heartbeat ticked louder. That feeling, that awful feeling, slid into his chest. It was the same unease that had crept over him when Daniel Mercer's bicycle was found years ago, half hidden in reeds by the creek. The same dread that whispered he was already too late. "Easy," Ethan murmured, steadying his own breathing more than Valor's. The shepherd shifted, his paws planting deeper into the gravel. His body braced as though awaiting a command. His chest expanded, and a faint vibration trembled through the leash. It began as the soft hum of warning deep in his throat. A growl. Ethan's pulse spiked. That sound, low, deliberate, unshakable, had once meant armed men waiting behind doors, explosives wired to a wall, danger invisible until it struck. It never came without reason. He tightened his grip on the leash, eyes locked on the house. The silence around them seemed to press in, as if the entire town held its breath. The fog hung heavy over the roof, curling through broken shingles, making the structure appear less like wood and more like a tombstone rising from weeds. "What is it?" Ethan whispered again, though he knew the dog couldn't answer. Valor's body was the answer. The warning. The shepherd's growl deepened, filling the empty street with a sound that seemed to come from another time, another battlefield. The mist swallowed it, but Ethan felt it in his bones. He stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching against the gravel, his eyes narrowing on the broken porch. His free hand instinctively brushed against the holster at his side. He hadn't drawn his weapon, not yet, but the thought coiled in his mind. There was nothing to see, no figures in the windows, no shift of curtains, no whisper of movement. But Ethan's instinct screamed in unison with Valor's. Something was inside. The town behind him stirred faintly, the distant thud of a bakery door closing, a crow calling from the steeple, but here at the edge of Raven Hollow, time seemed to stop. Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't know what waited beyond those broken walls. All he knew was that his past had followed him here, that his failures had led him to this house, this moment, and he knew he wouldn't walk away. The growl tore through the silence again, louder this time. The chapter of Raven Hollow's stillness ended, not with a scream, not with a crash, but with the sound of a dog's warning, steady and unyielding, shattering the false calm of dawn. The house loomed like a scar at the end of the lane. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the yard, the leash tight in his hand. Beside him, Valor remained rigid, his body humming with tension. The German shepherd's ears were pinned forward, his stance the very picture of controlled defiance. He wasn't moving, not an inch. Ethan let his eyes sweep over the structure. The porch sagged heavily. Boards bowed as though the house itself were exhausted. The steps leading up to it were cracked, weeds forcing their way through splinters. Ivy strangled the windows, curling up through the empty frames, its dark vines reaching like fingers, searching for air. One shutter banged softly in the wind, a hollow rhythm against the silence. He exhaled slowly, though it did little to calm him. He had been in houses like this before. They always looked the same. Neglect written across their bones, but something deeper lurking behind the rot. The mist was thinning now, allowing shafts of morning light to pierce through and settle across the overgrown yard. A rusted swing set leaned on its side in the weeds, its chains broken, the seat swallowed by grass. Someone had once lived here. Someone had laughed, but the years had stripped the place of warmth. All that remained was an uneasy hollowness that pressed against Ethan's chest. Valor shifted his paws, but didn't step forward. His head was low, his body angled toward the staircase. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. The stairs were worse up close, wood warped and split, concrete at the base fractured into jagged lines. One board had buckled, leaving a dark gap beneath. Shadows pooled there, thick and unyielding. To Ethan, it was just decay. To Valor, it was something else entirely. A growl rose from deep inside the shepherd's chest. Not the kind of warning bark he gave at strangers passing too close, but a sound Ethan recognized from darker days. It was the sound that came before a breach, before they pulled suspects from hidden compartments, before danger revealed itself. Ethan's skin prickled. The hairs at the back of his neck lifted, as if his body had been wired to Valor's instincts. He had learned long ago not to ignore them. "Easy," Ethan whispered, though his own voice was tight. He crouched, squinting at the base of the stairs. The jagged crack ran deeper than he thought. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than time eating away at stone. But the longer he looked, the less certain he became. He glanced at Valor again. The shepherd's lips were drawn tight, his eyes locked, his entire body vibrating with purpose. Ethan felt his chest tighten. A breeze pushed through the trees, carrying the smell of damp wood and rust. It should have been ordinary, but instead, it filled Ethan with dread. He had been in war zones, had smelled gunpowder and smoke, but this scent of rot and abandonment was worse. It whispered of secrets buried too long. He straightened, scanning the yard again. The silence was absolute, unnaturally so. No bird song, no hum of insects, just the faint creak of wood as the porch shifted against its own weight. "Something's off," he muttered. Valor growled again, sharper this time. His claws scraped at the gravel, pulling slightly against the leash. Ethan crouched down beside him, one hand running along the dog's back. Valor's muscles were taut, coiled like springs. "You're telling me not to go in there, aren't you?" Ethan asked softly. The shepherd didn't blink, didn't look at him. His eyes were locked on the staircase. His throat vibrated with another low growl that made Ethan's skin crawl. The feeling in his gut grew heavier. He had trusted Valor for years. The dog had once saved him from walking directly into a hidden snare in a collapsing warehouse, had dragged him clear of flying glass when a door exploded under pressure. Valor's instincts had never been wrong. Ethan swallowed hard, his eyes drifting back to the base of the steps. The crack looked too deliberate now. Not just wear and tear, it almost resembled a seam, as if something had been fitted into place long ago and forgotten. He rubbed the back of his neck, unsettled. For a long moment, he simply stood there in the overgrown yard, caught between doubt and trust. The morning light continued to grow, glinting off the rusted swing set, painting the ivy in shades of green, too bright for such a dark place. But none of it brought comfort. The silence of Raven Hollow pressed down harder than ever. Ethan's breath slowed, but his heart pounded. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. Valor was warning him, and he had never ignored Valor. The shepherd's growl deepened into a rumble that rolled through the mist, low and steady, a sound that did not belong to the peace of morning. And in that moment, standing before the crumbling house at the edge of town, Ethan realized this was no longer just a patrol. It was a step into something darker, something that had been waiting to be uncovered. The air was heavy, the silence absolute, and the sound of a dog's warning filled it, steady and unyielding. Ethan crouched low at the foot of the staircase, gravel crunching under his boots as he shifted closer. His breath formed a pale cloud in the morning chill, fading quickly into the mist. From this angle, the damage to the concrete was clearer. What he had first dismissed as ordinary decay now demanded attention. A jagged line ran across the base of the steps, crooked but deliberate, almost like a scar carved into the stone. It didn't look like the randomness of age. It looked like something made to blend in, a seam meant to be overlooked. Valor let out a sharp bark that cut through the silence, his claws raking at the ground near the crack. Dust rose with each strike of his paws, the dog's urgency unmistakable. His body pressed forward, muscles coiled, the leash taut in Ethan's grip. "All right, boy. Easy," Ethan muttered, though his own pulse was climbing. He leaned closer, brushing dirt away with his glove. The rough surface of the concrete crumbled under his touch, revealing the faint edge of something hidden beneath. The silence around him grew oppressive. No birds called, no wind rustled. Only Valor's steady growl filled the air, vibrating low and deep like a warning from the earth itself. Ethan straightened, glancing at the shepherd. Valor's eyes blazed with intensity, locked on the crack, as though he could see through stone. Ethan had trusted this dog too many times to second-guess him now. He exhaled, long and steady. "All right," he whispered. "Let's see what you've found." From the pouch on his belt, Ethan pulled a crowbar, its steel surface worn smooth from years of use. He weighed it in his hand for a moment, feeling the familiar heft. Then he slid the tip into the jagged seam. The first push met resistance. The crowbar scraped against concrete, the sound sharp and grating. He pressed harder, his arm straining. Bits of dust trickled down, catching in the light like ash. Valor barked again, lunging forward, pawing at the ground beside Ethan. The shepherd's agitation was palpable. Every part of him demanded action. "I hear you," Ethan muttered through clenched teeth. He shifted his stance, planting his boots wider, and drove the crowbar deeper into the crack. The edge bit in, splitting the seam just slightly. The sound of splintering concrete ripped through the yard, loud and jarring, echoing off the hollow walls of the house. Ethan froze for a heartbeat, his ears straining. No response came from within, no voice, no movement, only silence, heavier than before. He pressed again. The crowbar groaned against the stone, then gave way with a sharp snap. Chunks of concrete tumbled loose, scattering across the dirt. The sound reverberated like a hammer against his nerves. Valor's growl rose to a bark, sharper now, almost desperate. He pawed at the loosened pieces, trying to dig further. Dust clung to his fur, but he didn't stop. His body screamed urgency, as if time itself were running thin. Ethan coughed through the haze of concrete dust, his throat burning. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve, leaving a streak of grit across his skin. "What the hell is this?" he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. He drove the crowbar in again, this time with the full force of his shoulder. The concrete split wider, the jagged seam crumbling into fragments. The sound cracked through the morning air like gunfire. For a moment, Ethan's mind snapped back to war zones, to doors kicked in, to walls collapsing around him. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was Raven Hollow, quiet and still, or at least it had pretended to be. The last wedge of concrete broke free with a violent crack, tumbling aside. Beneath the shattered surface, the outline of a wooden hatch emerged, its edges rough but unmistakable. Ethan's stomach tightened. A trapdoor, hidden in plain sight. He looked at Valor, whose body shook with urgency now. The leash stretched tight as he lunged toward the opening. The shepherd's bark was no longer a warning. It was a demand. Ethan swallowed, sweat slicking his palms despite the cool air. His heartbeat hammered in his ears. Whatever lay beneath that hatch was the reason for the silence of this house, the reason Valor's instincts screamed at him not to walk away. The dust settled slowly, drifting down like ash after a fire. The morning light broke through the mist and fell across the shattered steps, illuminating the dark seam that had been exposed. Ethan pressed his hand against the rough wood, feeling the chill seeping through it. He drew in a long breath, steadying himself, every nerve alive with unease. Behind him, Raven Hollow remained quiet, too quiet. And in that silence, Valor barked once more, sharp and commanding, urging Ethan to act. The last fragments of concrete crumbled away, leaving the rough outline of the hatch exposed. Ethan wiped the grit from his palms, his chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. The morning light fell across the wood, revealing warped planks stained dark with age. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the foundation. It was built to hide. Valor's nails scraped against the edges, his body pressed forward, barking furiously now. His barks were sharp, relentless, carrying the kind of urgency Ethan had only ever heard when lives hung in the balance. "All right," Ethan muttered, his voice hoarse. "All right, I hear you." He crouched, gripping the iron handle embedded into the hatch. It was slick with rust, rough beneath his fingers. He braced himself, drawing in a long breath as if the air might steady his shaking hands. The hatch resisted at first, groaning like something that hadn't been touched in years. Ethan pulled harder, the wood creaking against its own frame, dust raining down over his boots. Valor's barking cut through the sound, louder, insistent, pushing Ethan forward. With a final wrench, the hatch gave way, snapping open with a shriek of rusted hinges. A rush of stale, suffocating air burst upward, carrying the smell of damp earth and mildew. Ethan's gut twisted. He raised his flashlight and shone it into the darkness. At first he saw only dirt walls and a shallow pit, shadows stretching across the uneven floor. Then, as the beam steadied, something shifted, small, fragile. Ethan's heart lurched. In the far corner, curled into herself, was a child. She couldn't have been more than 6. Her wrists and ankles were bound with coarse rope, the fibers biting into her skin. Her dress was torn, streaked with grime. Dirt clung to her arms, her legs, her tangled hair. She trembled violently, every shake of her small frame magnified by the narrow space around her. Her face, God, her face, was streaked with dried tears. Tracks etched into the dirt smudged across her cheeks. Her lips moved soundlessly, as if she had been crying too long and no voice remained. Ethan froze, breath locked in his chest. Time itself seemed to collapse around him. He had seen death. He had seen blood. But this was something else. This was innocence, caged beneath rotting wood. "Jesus," he whispered. Valor's growl shifted into a high-pitched whine, the kind of sound he rarely made. He lowered his body to the ground, pressing his head toward the opening, as if to reach the child himself. The girl flinched at the sound of voices above her. Her eyes, wide and glassy, lifted toward the beam of light. For a heartbeat, Ethan met her gaze. It wasn't just fear in her eyes. It was something deeper, more haunting, the look of someone who had been waiting and no longer believed anyone would come. That look hit Ethan like a hammer. Daniel Mercer's face, the boy he had failed years ago, flashed in his mind. The memory of a promise broken collided with the sight before him. Not again. He wouldn't let it happen again. He dropped to his knees, leaning over the edge. "Hey," he said softly, his voice breaking despite himself. "It's okay. You're safe now. I've got you." The girl didn't respond, her small frame still trembling violently. Ethan fumbled for his radio, his fingers unsteady. "Dispatch," he rasped, forcing his voice steady. "This is Officer Cole. I've got a child. Repeat. Child found. Female, approximately 6 years old. Bound, alive, but in critical condition. I need immediate backup and medical at my location." The words hung in the air, heavier than any he'd spoken in years. He clipped the radio back and reached toward her. His hand hovered above her, not wanting to frighten her further. "I'm going to get you out," he said. "No one's going to hurt you anymore." Valor whined again, his body pressed low, his gaze never leaving the child. She shifted slightly, her eyes flicking to the shepherd, then back to Ethan. Something softened in her stare, a flicker of trust, faint but real. That was enough. Ethan climbed into the pit, the stale air pressing against him. He crouched carefully, his flashlight beam steady on her. He pulled his knife from his belt and reached for the ropes. "Hold still, sweetheart. Just hold still." The blade slid through the fibers, one rope after another, falling loose. Each cut revealed angry red marks where the bindings had dug into her skin. Ethan's throat burned. When the last rope fell, the girl curled tighter, as though afraid to believe in freedom. Ethan slid his jacket from his shoulders and draped it gently around her, the fabric swallowing her small frame. "It's over," he whispered. "I promise." Her tiny fingers clutched at the sleeve of his jacket, weak but desperate. She said nothing, only held on, as though that single grip was the last thing tethering her to this world. Above them, the sun had risen higher, its light pushing through the mist, falling across the broken porch and the open hatch. What had been hidden was now exposed. Ethan tightened his hold on the girl and looked up toward Valor. The shepherd's ears were forward, his body taut, but his eyes carried something gentler now, watchfulness, protectiveness, as if he understood exactly what had been saved. Ethan's radio crackled faintly, with confirmation that backup was on the way, but he barely heard it. His pulse was still pounding, his chest still tight, because he knew this wasn't just one crime. This wasn't just one child. No one went to such lengths for a single act of cruelty. This was part of something larger, something darker. He pulled the girl closer, her small frame trembling against him, and whispered into her tangled hair, "You're safe. I've got you. You're not alone anymore." But in the silence that followed, with Valor's steady breathing beside him and the weight of the broken hatch hanging open, Ethan felt the truth settle like stone in his gut. This was no isolated crime. This was a doorway into something Raven Hollow had buried for far too long, and the darkness had only just begun to show its face. The ropes fell away with a final slice of Ethan's knife, their frayed ends collapsing onto the dirt floor like shed snakeskin. For a heartbeat, the girl didn't move. She stayed curled in the corner of the pit, as though her body had forgotten what freedom meant. Her small shoulders quivered under the weight of his jacket, and her breath came in ragged gasps, too shallow, too broken. Ethan crouched low, his knees pressing into the damp earth, and forced his voice into something softer than the storm rising in his chest. "You're safe now," he whispered. "I've got you." Her eyes, wide and glassy, flickered toward him, then back to the shepherd above the hatch. Valor's massive frame loomed there, his head lowered, ears pricked forward. The dog let out a low whine, gentle, coaxing, so unlike the growls he'd given moments before. Something shifted in the girl's stare. Her gaze lingered on Valor, as if the animal's steady presence gave her permission to believe. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Not a word. Ethan slid closer, slow, as if approaching a wild bird, careful not to startle her. He extended a hand, palm up, waiting. The silence stretched. Then, hesitantly, her tiny fingers reached out and touched his. They were ice cold, trembling so violently he thought his heart might crack in two. "That's it," he murmured, wrapping his larger hand gently around hers. "You're not alone anymore." With painstaking care, Ethan slipped his arms beneath her frail body. She weighed almost nothing, the lightness of her frame a cruel reminder of neglect. When he lifted her, she flinched, her arms darting upward, clutching at his sleeve with desperate strength. She buried her face against his chest, as though trying to vanish inside the folds of his jacket. The sound she made was not a cry, but something smaller, weaker. A broken exhale that carried more sorrow than any scream could. Ethan held her tighter, his throat tightening painfully. He could feel every tremor of her body through the thin fabric of her dress. He angled his chin down, whispering into her tangled hair. "You're safe now, sweetheart. I promise." Valor backed up slightly, making room as Ethan climbed out of the pit with the girl in his arms. The shepherd moved with precision, stepping close to Ethan's side the moment his boots found solid ground. His body angled outward, his posture protective, a sentinel shielding them both. The girl's grip on Ethan's sleeve didn't loosen. Her small hand clung to him with the ferocity of someone who feared the world would vanish if she let go. She still hadn't spoken. Not a single word. Ethan draped the jacket tighter around her, cocooning her against the morning chill. The smell of dust and mildew clung to her hair. The scent of fear soaked into her skin. He wanted to wash it all away, to strip the horror from her life as easily as cutting through rope. But some wounds couldn't be cleaned with water. Some wounds stayed. Valor pressed his nose gently to the girl's hand where it gripped Ethan's sleeve. The shepherd exhaled softly, the warm brush of his breath coaxing her. For a moment, her fingers shifted. She loosened her hold on Ethan just enough to brush the dog's muzzle with her fingertips. The contact was tentative, fleeting, but it was real. Ethan felt something stir in his chest at the sight. Valor, scarred and limping yet steadfast, had always been more than a partner. Now, in the hollow quiet of this yard, he became the bridge between fear and safety for a broken child. The girl turned her face slightly, enough for Ethan to glimpse her features beneath the curtain of matted hair. Dirt streaked her cheeks, but the lines of dried tears cut through, carving pale rivers down her face. Her lips trembled, her eyes searching his with a kind of fragile desperation. He nodded, voice steady, even as emotion clawed at him. "I'm here. We're not leaving you." The distant crackle of his radio broke the silence, dispatch confirming that backup was en route. But Ethan barely heard it. His world had shrunk to the weight in his arms. The heartbeat pressed faintly against his chest, the steady shadow of the dog at his side. He shifted slightly, scanning the yard, every instinct on alert. This house was no accident. It wasn't decay that had hidden her here. It was intent. Someone had built this hiding place. Someone had left her bound and trembling in the dark. And if there was one child, there could be more. The thought twisted his gut. He adjusted his grip, cradling the girl more securely. She let out a soft sound, not quite a word, more like the faintest sigh. But her hand tightened around his sleeve again, knuckles white. Ethan pressed his palm gently against her back. "You hold on as tight as you need," he whispered. "I'll carry you the rest of the way." Valor moved in closer, brushing his shoulder against Ethan's leg, his steady presence anchoring them all. The dog's eyes never left the girl, his vigilance absolute. The sunlight had grown stronger now, burning through the last of the mist. It lit the broken boards of the porch, the shattered remains of concrete scattered across the dirt. What had been hidden was exposed to the world, and in Ethan's arms lay the living proof of Raven Hollow's darkest secret. He began to walk, step by careful step, away from the house. The girl's grip never loosened. She still whispered nothing, only clung tighter, as if Ethan were the last solid thing in a collapsing world. And maybe, for now, he was. The wail of sirens cut through the morning stillness, their echo bouncing off the narrow streets of Raven Hollow. Ethan stood in the yard, the girl wrapped tightly in his jacket, her small frame trembling against him. Valor remained pressed against his side, vigilant, his eyes never straying far from the shattered concrete steps and the open hatch that had birthed this nightmare. Dust still lingered in the air, curling upward like smoke from a dying fire. To Ethan, every second until backup arrived stretched into eternity. He could feel the girl's shallow breaths against his chest, each one too fragile, as if the weight of the world might shatter her completely. The first patrol car screeched to a halt, gravel scattering beneath its tires. Doors slammed, footsteps thundered. Detective Clara Hayes was the first to appear, tall, sharp-eyed, her dark hair pulled back into a severe knot. Years on the force had etched quiet lines into her face, but it was her eyes that carried the truth, the look of someone who had seen too much, yet refused to turn away. Behind her came Sergeant Daniel Price, broader, heavier, his uniform stretched across a frame built for confrontation. His gaze swept the scene instantly, taking in the broken stairs, the open hatch, the way Ethan clutched the girl as if she were the last piece of something worth saving. "Jesus," Daniel muttered, his voice low, almost reverent. Clara moved closer, her boots crunching over the gravel. She didn't waste words on pleasantries. "Status?" Ethan's throat was dry, but he forced the words out steady. "Alive. Barely. Bound when I found her. Must have been down there for days." He glanced down at the girl. Her face was pale, lips cracked, dirt streaked along her cheeks. She hadn't spoken a word, only clung tighter to his sleeve. "She needs medical now." Daniel knelt briefly, his voice softer than Ethan expected. "Sweetheart, can you hear me?" The girl didn't answer. She buried her face deeper into Ethan's chest, her tiny hand gripping his jacket, as if the world might disappear if she let go. Clara's jaw tightened. She motioned to the medic stepping out of the second cruiser. "Get over here, now." The medic hurried forward with a kit, glancing at Ethan for permission. He crouched beside the girl, speaking in calm, measured tones. "Just a quick check, sir." "We won't hurt her." Ethan loosened his hold just enough for the medic to shine a small light across her eyes, check her pulse, examine the angry red marks still etched around her wrists. Each detail carved another line of fury into Ethan's chest. "She's dehydrated, malnourished," the medic said grimly. "But she's alive. Lucky she is." He looked up at Clara. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately." Clara nodded, but her gaze was locked on Ethan. "Where exactly did you find her?" Ethan gestured toward the hatch, still yawning open beneath the fractured steps. Down there. Hidden. Someone went through a lot of trouble to keep her out of sight. Daniel swore under his breath, rising to his feet. His eyes swept the house, the yard, the broken swing swallowed by weeds. What kind of monster leaves a child like this? Ethan's voice was low, edged with something darker than anger. Not a monster. Monsters act alone. This. He shook his head. This feels organized. Clara crouched beside the hatch, peering into the darkness. The air rising from it was damp, rank with the smell of confinement. She looked back at Ethan, her voice hard. You think there are more? Ethan met her eyes. I don't think. I know. For a moment, the silence between them was heavier than the mist. Vala growled softly, the sound vibrating like truth through the stillness. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand over his face. God help us. If there's one. His words trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like a blade. The girl shifted weakly in Ethan's arms. He looked down, his voice softening instantly. You're safe now, Sophie. Do you hear me? Safe. Clara's head snapped toward him. Sophie? That's her name, Ethan said, his voice quieter now. Sophie Turner. Dispatch confirmed it matches a missing person report from 2 weeks ago. His chest tightened as he spoke the words. She's not the first, Clara. And she won't be the last. Clara stood, her eyes sweeping the abandoned house again. Her voice was grim, final. Then we're not just dealing with a kidnapping. This is bigger. Much bigger. Daniel clenched his fists, his gaze narrowing on the hatch. You think this is tied to the others? Ethan's jaw tightened. He could feel Sophie's fingers still gripping his sleeve, the tiny weight of her trust pressing into his skin. He thought of Daniel Mercer, the boy he had lost years ago, and the pattern that was beginning to emerge. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned. I think Raven Hollow has been hiding something for a very long time, he said. And we've only just torn back the first layer. Clara's expression hardened. She turned to the medic. Get her out of here. Now, straight to the hospital. And no leaks. Not a word to the press until we know what we're dealing with. The medic nodded, carefully lifting Sophie into his arms. For the first time, she whimpered. A tiny sound, raw and broken. Ethan reached out, brushing her hand gently, reassuring her, as the medic carried her toward the waiting ambulance. Vala followed a few steps, his eyes locked on her until the doors closed behind her. The sirens wailed again, carrying Sophie away from the house of silence. Ethan stood rooted in the yard, his fists tightening at his sides. Clara stepped beside him, her voice low but steady. This isn't random. Someone built that hiding place. Someone used it. The question is, how many others never made it out? Daniel's voice was gruff, his gaze sweeping the empty windows of the house. And how deep does this go? Ethan swallowed hard, his chest heavy with the weight of too many ghosts. He looked back at the hatch, the jagged concrete broken wide. The truth was clear, as stark as the morning sun cutting through the mist. This was no isolated crime. It was the beginning of something far darker. The ambulance's siren faded into the distance, swallowed by the hills beyond Raven Hollow. Ethan stood in the quiet yard, his jacket still clinging to the lingering warmth of the small body he had carried. The emptiness in his arms was almost unbearable. Vala pressed against his side, anchoring him, his dark eyes tracking every movement around the abandoned house, as if danger still lingered in the shadows. Detective Clara Hayes motioned toward the squad cars. We need to run her name through the system now. If she's been missing, she'll be in the database. Ethan nodded stiffly, his chest still heavy with the image of the girl's dirt-streaked face. Sophie. That was the name he had whispered, and even before confirmation, he had felt the truth of it in his bones. Inside the patrol car, the computer screen glowed pale against the dim interior. Clara typed with sharp, deliberate strokes, her jaw tight. Daniel Price leaned against the open door, arms crossed, his expression grim. Ethan stood close, Valor at his heel, the glow of the monitor reflecting in his tired eyes. The database pulled up the report in seconds. Sophie Turner, age 6. Missing since 14 days ago. Last seen walking home from school on Elm Street. A photograph filled the screen, a school picture with her hair brushed neatly, her smile small but bright. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs, the same eyes, the same round cheeks, now haunted by ropes and dirt. The transformation was almost too much to bear. He pressed a hand against the edge of the car door, steadying himself. 2 weeks, he said quietly. She's been down there for 2 weeks. Clara's voice was clipped, controlled, but her eyes flickered with something sharper. If she survived that long, someone was coming back. Someone was keeping her alive. The thought made Ethan's stomach twist. This wasn't a case of abandonment. It was deliberate, planned, and Sophie wasn't the only one. "Look at this," Clara said, clicking through the system. "There have been others." One by one the files appeared. Different names, different faces, all children. Each one had disappeared within the last decade. Some were never found. Others turned up far from Raven Hollow, bodies lifeless, their stories unfinished. Every report shared a thread that chilled Ethan to the marrow. All of them were last seen within or near the boundaries of Raven Hollow. Daniel swore under his breath, pacing a short line in the gravel. This can't be coincidence. Ethan stared at the screen, the photographs blurring together in his vision. Smiling faces frozen in time, never knowing what waited for them in the shadows. His chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. He saw Daniel Mercer among them, though his face wasn't there. The memory of that case, the boy he couldn't save, burned like acid behind his ribs. Valor shifted uneasily, letting out a soft whine as if echoing his thoughts. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's head, grounding himself. "These aren't random kidnappings," Clara said, her voice low. "They form a pattern. Someone's been operating here for years." Ethan forced his gaze back to the screen. His throat was dry. "And the town let it happen." Clara didn't disagree. She leaned closer to the monitor, tracing the timeline with her finger. Every 3 or 4 years, a child vanishes. No suspects, no resolution. The files just fade. And now Sophie. Ethan clenched his fists, his knuckles whitening. "No, not just Sophie. She's the one we found. But there are more. There have to be." Daniel turned sharply toward him. "You're saying there's a network?" "I'm saying," Ethan replied, his voice hardening, "no one builds hidden compartments in rotting houses for a one-time job. This is systematic. Organized." He looked at the hatch still open in the yard, the dark maw leading into silence. "And whoever's behind it has been doing this for a long time." The weight of those words settled over the group. Even the hum of the squad car's engine seemed subdued, as if the machine itself recognized the gravity of what lay before them. Clara closed the file with a decisive click. We need a task force. This isn't something Raven Hollow PD can handle alone. Daniel shook his head, his voice laced with frustration. Feds will take months to mobilize. And in the meantime, how many more kids vanish? The argument crackled between them, but Ethan barely heard it. His focus remained on Sophie's picture, her school smile frozen in time. He imagined her small hand clinging to his sleeve, silent, trembling. She had survived because she had to, because somewhere deep inside, she believed someone might come. That someone had been him. And now he bore the weight of every other child who had never been pulled into the light. He whispered her name, almost reverently, Sophie Turner. Valor nudged his leg with his nose, a grounding reminder that he wasn't standing alone. The shepherd's scars mirrored his own. They both knew what it meant to carry ghosts, and both knew they couldn't walk away. Ethan straightened slowly, his gaze hardening as he looked at Clara and Daniel. We can debate jurisdiction later. Right now, the truth is simple. There's a pattern. It's here. It's been here for years. And unless we stop it, Sophie won't be the last. Clara held his gaze for a long moment before nodding. Daniel exhaled sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. The decision hung unspoken but undeniable. Raven Hollow was no longer just a town of peeling paint and cobblestone streets. It was a hunting ground, and Ethan Cole, with Valor at his side, had just stepped into the heart of it. The ambulance had vanished down the road, carrying Sophie toward light and safety, but the house that had swallowed her for 2 weeks still loomed behind, silent and sullen, as though it resented giving her up. Ethan Cole stood on the porch, jaw tight, adjusting his gloves. Clara Hayes murmured quiet orders to the uniforms outside, while Daniel Price checked his sidearm, his bulk crowding the narrow doorway. Beside Ethan, Valor's body was taut, nose quivering, ears pricked toward whatever secret still lay inside. The porch groaned as they stepped over the threshold. The air inside was thick, stale, carrying mildew and something sharper, fear left behind. Dust floated in the shafts of light, slicing through broken shutters. The first room had once been a living space, but life had long drained from it. Furniture slumped against walls, wallpaper peeled in curling strips. Ethan's beam froze on the floor. Half buried in dust lay a toy truck, chipped and missing a wheel. He crouched, lifting it with gloved fingers. Beneath the grime, faint red and blue still shone. His throat tightened. This place wasn't empty. Valor sniffed the toy, then pressed toward a corner, pawing at the wall. The flashlight revealed faint chalk drawings, stick figures holding hands, a crooked sun, the kind of art meant for refrigerator doors, not rotting plaster. Beside them were tallies etched into the wall, 20, 30, then smudges fading into nothing. Daniel muttered, God Almighty. Clara's sharp intake of breath cut the silence. Children lived here. Ethan's chest burned. He pictured laughter trapped in this place, innocence smeared into chalk and dust. His hand tightened around the beam, jaw grinding as they pressed deeper. The hallway stretched narrow, doors lining either side. The first closet smelled of rot and iron. Locks had been bolted into the inside of the frame. Ethan pictured small hands clawing in darkness, muffled cries swallowed by wood. Another closet, more locks, more scratches. Valor whined low, pawing at the threshold. Ethan steadied him, voice rough. I know, boy, I know. In a bedroom, dust lay thick as snowdrifts. A cracked porcelain doll lay discarded, one eye missing. Clara's hands trembled as she lifted it. They left in a hurry. Or they didn't care. Daniel's voice rumbled. Or they never thought anyone would come looking. The words hung like a curse. Every detail screamed the same truth. This house was not abandoned. It was a cage. Then Valor lunged toward the far wall, barking sharp. Ethan swung the beam. A faint seam traced along the baseboard. Clara's eyes met his. No words needed. Somewhere behind these walls, more secrets slept. At the precinct, the air smelled of stale coffee and paper worn thin by too many hands. Clara had dragged a tower of faded files from the archives, dust still clinging to their covers. She spread them across the oak table, her face carved from stone. "These go back 20 years, she said. "Missing children. Raven Hollow jurisdiction. All unresolved." Daniel flipped a file open, thick fingers tracing typewritten lines. "No suspects, no leads. All of them are close to where Sophie was found." Ethan's eyes burned as he forced himself to look at each photograph clipped inside. Children's faces, some grinning toothless, some shy, all frozen in innocence. He had carried one ghost for years, Daniel Mercer, the boy he'd failed. Now the ghosts multiplied, crowding the room. "It's a pattern," Clara murmured. "Every 3 or 4 years, another child, and no one asked why." Ethan reached down, fingers brushing Valor's fur. Sophie's trembling hand still haunted him, clinging to his sleeve in silence. How many others had reached for rescue that never came? His voice cracked. They didn't vanish. They were taken. And this town turned its head. Silence pressed heavy. Then Valor nosed at a torn evidence box, tugging until a scrap of fabric came free. Frayed, stained, initials stitched faintly into the corner. A.M. Clara leaned closer. Hand-stitched. Someone cared. The memory struck Ethan like a blade. Anna Maven, 8 years old, missing in 2012. Last seen in a pink dress, her mother had embroidered with those initials. "This belonged to her," he whispered. Daniel cursed, slamming the file shut. Then Sophie wasn't the first in that house, and she might not be the last. Ethan rubbed his eyes, guilt pressing down like iron. He remembered Anna's mother, her voice hoarse from calling her child's name. They had searched until hope dried up, then shoved the case into archives. Now Valor had pulled her ghost back into the light. Clara's voice was steel. "Sophie's case isn't isolated. It's part of a chain." Ethan's chest ached. He pressed a hand to Valor's head, grounding himself in the shepherd's warmth. His voice steadied. "Not again." "Not this time." Sophie made it out. She won't be the only one. In the conference room, a corkboard bristled with red pins and scraps of paper. Clara moved like a surgeon. Sleeves rolled, focus sharp. Each pin landed with a click. Another child, another year. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, Valor stretched at his boots, unblinking. Daniel stood near the doorway, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of what the board revealed. Clara stepped back. The pins weren't scattered. They clustered in a tight radius. Every disappearance in 20 years spiraled around one point. The neighborhood where Sophie had been found. Ethan's chest clenched. "It's the epicenter." "Every path leads back to that house," Clara confirmed, tracing a finger around the cluster. "It wasn't random." Daniel's frustration broke through. "Why here? What's so special about Raven Hollow? No one answered. Silence pressed, thick and suffocating. Ethan stared at the center of the map, where the house pulsed like a dark heart. Sophie's silence still clung to him. She wasn't closure. She was proof the rot still lived. Valor stirred, letting out a low rumble. Ethan knelt, brushing the shepherd's scarred ear. Even he knows this isn't over. Clara pinned another photograph. A boy named Caleb Morton vanished in 2017. His bike never found. Another face joined the board. Then another. Soon the map was a tapestry of loss, children's smiles pinned like ghosts to the paper. Ethan's voice was hoarse. How many parents are still waiting? Too many, Clara said flatly. Daniel's fists clenched. If this is organized, then Raven Hollow's been a hunting ground. The word poisoned the air. Ethan pressed his palms to the table, leaning forward. Whoever runs this didn't just pick Raven Hollow. They built something here. They hid it in plain sight. Clara's pin struck the corkboard. And we'll drag it into the light. For a long moment, the map spoke louder than words. Red pins marking graves, laughter stolen, wounds left to rot. Valor rose, nails clicking against tile, and sat rigid beneath Sophie's pin, eyes locked forward. Ethan's voice cut through the silence. Then we don't stop until every last pin has an answer. The words rang final, unyielding. And as night settled over Raven Hollow, the map stood like a mirror, showing not only what had been lost, but the war that lay ahead. The day was bleeding out by the time Ethan and Valor left the precinct. The sun sagged low, amber light spilling across Raven Hollow's crooked streets. To anyone else, it might have seemed peaceful. To Ethan, there was no peace. Sophie's silence still echoed in his chest, and the map of missing children burned behind his eyes. Valor padded ahead, leash slack, nose fixed to the ground. Ethan had learned long ago, you followed when the shepherd led. Tonight was no different. The pavement gave way to gravel, then dirt. Weeds rose tall along fallow fields, crickets buzzing as the sky dimmed. Ethan felt the weight of the evening sink into his bones. Then Valor froze, head snapping right, ears sharp. A growl rumbled in his chest, tugging toward a narrow path swallowed by briars. Ethan adjusted his grip. "What is it, boy?" The shepherd answered by pulling forward with unshakable resolve. Ethan followed, ducking under branches, his flashlight cutting through the gloom until the trees broke. A barn stood half hidden in the overgrowth. Its walls sagged, gray boards splintered, roof collapsing in patches. One door was chained loosely, the other swayed with the wind, each groan a protest. Ethan's gut twisted. He'd seen abandoned barns before, but this one felt alive in its decay, as if it had been waiting. Valor whined low, dust stirring golden in the last rays of sun. "All right," Ethan murmured. "Let's see what you found." The grass around the barn was trampled. Kneeling, Ethan pressed his palm to the dirt. Fresh tracks. Not a relic. Something used. Valor's nails clicked against warped boards as they reached the chained door. He pressed his muzzle into the gap, inhaled sharply, then barked. Birds burst from the rafters, scattering against the dimming sky. Silence crashed back down, heavier than before. The chain was looped carelessly, not locked. Ethan's flashlight caught fresh scrapes in the metal, recently used. He glanced at Valor, rigid, ears forward, body taut. Every line screamed danger. I don't like it either, Ethan muttered. He unhooked the chain. The door groaned, dust spilling as it opened into blackness. The smell seeped out, rot, hay, something metallic. Valor slipped in first, low and silent. Ethan followed, flashlight beam cutting through dust that drifted like ash in a cathedral of decay. Old tools rusted on the walls. Rafters sagged with cobwebs, but beneath the mold was another scent, wrong, electric. The shepherd padded deeper, nose sweeping, tail stiff. At the back wall, he froze, pawing at a seam where boards didn't sit flush. He barked once, sharp. Dust rained from the beams. Ethan crouched, running his fingers along the wood. Too straight. He tugged. On the third pull, a plank gave with a snap. Behind it yawned a hidden compartment. Air seeped out, stagnant, rank, tinged with mildew and damp earth. Ethan's stomach turned as his hand brushed something solid, stacked. He dragged it out into the light. A wooden box, plain, edges chipped, lid grooved with age. His heart hammered. Valor growled, circling. Ethan flipped the lid. Photographs. Dozens, tied in twine, edges curling with time. He lifted one stack, his beam catching the first image. A girl, no older than 8, sat on a cracked concrete floor. Wrists bound, mouth gagged, tears cutting through dirt on her cheeks. Her eyes, terrified, pleading, reached straight through the years. Ethan's throat closed. He flipped to the next. A boy, hollow-eyed. Another. Then another. Children of every age, their innocence crushed into snapshots of despair. The stack slipped from his hands, photographs fanning across the dirt like fallen leaves. Dozens of faces stared back, silent witnesses. Ethan pressed a hand to his eyes, fighting the burn. One image cut deeper than the rest. A sandy-haired boy, 10 at most. The resemblance clawed at him. Daniel Mercer. The case he'd failed. His chest heaved. Valor pressed against him, steady, unyielding, as if to anchor him from drowning in guilt. Ethan whispered, voice raw. They catalogued them. Every one. Ethan? Clara's voice carried faintly from outside. You find something? He couldn't answer yet. He crouched lower, scanning the backs of the photos. Dates, initials, codes, a system, not trophies, records. It wasn't random. It was organized. The photograph shook in his trembling hands, but his voice hardened to steel. We're not letting this go. Not this time. As the last light bled through the roof, dust swirled golden across the children's faces, as if their ghosts lingered, waiting. Then Valor stiffened. His growl rose like a warning bell, body angled toward the far shadows. Ethan froze. He hadn't heard anything. Valor had. From the darkness, a figure emerged. Tall, thin, a long coat brushing the boards, a hat brim shadowing his face. He moved not like someone caught, but someone expected. Ethan's weapon rose, flashlight slicing across him. Don't move. The man stopped. Calm. Too calm. His voice is smooth. Cold. Officer Cole, you found what you weren't supposed to. Ethan's pulse spiked. He hadn't given his name. Valor's growl deepened, teeth bared. Hands where I can see them, Ethan snapped. The man obeyed, palms outward, smirk intact. I'm not here to fight. My name is Marcus Hale. The name meant nothing yet, but Hale's posture screamed control, not a pawn, something higher. Step closer and I put you down, Ethan warned. Hale chuckled, humorless. Always the righteous soldier. You think pointing a gun changes anything? You've opened a door you can't close. and the people behind it, they don't forgive. Valor lunged, bark echoing like a gunshot. Ethan strained to hold him back, finger twitching on the trigger. "You're going to tell me," Ethan growled. "The children, the photos, Sophie Turner, all of it." Hale tilted his head, studying him as if dissecting. "You think this is about one girl? About Raven Hollow?" He shook his head. "This is bigger than your little town, bigger than you." "Then start talking," Ethan pressed. For the first time, Hale's eyes flickered. Respect? Annoyance? He whispered instead, "If I speak, I'm dead before sunrise. My role is to deliver a message." His voice sharpened. "Walk away." Ethan's jaw clenched, fury burning. "I don't walk away from kids on the ground, not ever." Hale's thin smile returned. "That's what makes you dangerous, and that's why you won't survive." The bond seemed to tighten around them, shadows pressing in. Ethan steadied his breath, gun unwavering. Valor's growl rolled like thunder. "Who else is involved?" Ethan demanded. Hale's answer chilled him. "Names won't save you. All you've done is shine a light where it doesn't belong, and light draws attention." Valor lunged again, snapping teeth. Hale's gaze flicked to him. "Loyal dog, he'll die before you. They always do." The words sliced deep, but instead of breaking Ethan, they tempered him. His voice dropped low. "Try to touch him. See how fast you fall." The standoff crackled like static. Then Hale stepped back, coat brushing the dirt. His voice trailed into the gloom. "You've made yourself a target." Footsteps faded into silence. Dust hung heavy. The barn swallowed the man whole. Ethan held his aim a moment longer, heart pounding. Valor barked sharply, straining at the leash. Finally, Ethan lowered the gun, his hand trembling. He crouched, resting it on the shepherd's scarred shoulder. "We're not walking away, boy. Not now. Not ever." Valor licked his hand once, grounding him. The last light drained through the cracks. The photographs lay scattered, silent witnesses across the dirt. Ethan's jaw tightened. He had stared into the face of the network, and the war had only just begun. The barn had fallen into silence after Marcus Hale vanished into the tree line. Ethan stood in the dim light, chest heaving, gun still raised, though there was nothing left to aim at. Valor circled near his side, muscles taut, a low growl vibrating through the floorboards. The photographs whispered in the hush, their curled edges stirring in the draft. Ethan crouched to gather a handful, then froze. A scrape, boots against straw. He spun, a flashlight beam slicing the dark. A blur lunged from the shadows, knife flashing. The blade arced toward his chest. Valor moved first. The shepherd slammed into the attacker with bone-jarring force. Garrett Dawson's knife missed by inches, hissing through empty air. He crashed to the dirt, Valor's jaws clamping down on his forearm. The scream that followed rattled the rafters. "Valor, hold!" Ethan barked, circling, weapon trained. The dog obeyed with terrifying precision, teeth buried deep, pinning Garrett to the ground. Blood ran down his sleeve as he writhed, free hands scrabbling for the knife. "You don't understand," Garrett shouted, eyes wild. "You shouldn't be here." "Drop it," Ethan snapped. Garrett bucked harder, but Valor's jaws refused to give. Ethan's boot smashed down on his wrist. The knife clattered across the boards. Valor released only to snap an inch from Garrett's throat, holding him frozen. Pinned beneath man and dog, Garrett sagged, gasping, sweat streaking through dirt on his face. Hatred still burned in his eyes. Ethan crouched low, gun steady. "Start talking." Garrett coughed, voice raw. "I'm nothing. A runner. Delivery. You don't know what you've walked into." Valor's growl deepened. Garrett flinched. Ethan's voice cut like steel. "And the children? You moved them too? Garrett's eyes flicked toward the scattered photographs. Silence. Shame flickered across his face. He didn't need to speak. The truth bled through his eyes. Rage surged through Ethan, hot and choking. Sophie's trembling body, Anna Maven's initials on faded fabric, Daniel Mercer's unsolved case, all of it pressed down like fire. But information was more valuable than fury. He steadied his weapon. Then you're going to tell me everything, every name, every place, or Vala's teeth will be the least of your worries. Garrett's panic cracked. I just moved shipments. I didn't touch them. Shipments? Ethan's voice sharpened. Garrett's words tangled in desperation. They find weak men, debts, addicts, people no one will miss. They make us choose, work or disappear. His voice shook. I didn't choose this. I never wanted this. Ethan picked up a photograph, shoving it close. A girl of 8, wrists bound, terror in her eyes. She didn't choose either. And you carried her. Garrett's lips trembled. His eyes watered. I just handed them off. The barn's one stop. They moved them farther after. Ethan's stomach knotted. This wasn't a hideout. It was an artery. The photos weren't trophies. They were records. Who else is involved? Ethan demanded. Garrett's chest heaved. I don't know names. I never see faces. I just load them into the truck. What truck? His voice dropped to a whisper. Black. No plates. Comes at night. No schedule. You hear the engine, and you know someone's about to vanish. He swallowed hard. It doesn't just carry kids, files, people. Whatever they want gone. Vala growled, angling toward the barn doors, as though the mention of it alone was enough. Ethan's pulse pounded. The truck. An artery that connected Raven Hollow's rot to something larger, faceless. Garrett's voice broke. Once they know you've seen this, they'll send it. You can't stop it. You don't want to meet the people inside. Ethan leaned closer, every word a blade. Where does it go? I don't know, Garrett shouted, panic spilling over. I hand them off, that's it. You ask too many questions, you end up in the truck yourself. Ethan's jaw clenched, fury threatening to drown him. He thought of Sophie's hand gripping his sleeve, the pins on Clara's map, the children's faces staring up from the dirt. He wanted to unleash valor, to end Garrett here. But he forced the rage down. Garrett was a lead, maybe the only one. You're coming with me, Ethan said coldly. And you're going to give the rest at the station. Garrett slumped, defeated. Blood dripped from his torn arm. Sweat streaked his face, but his eyes still burned with warning. You think dragging me out changes anything? It doesn't. The truck will finish what I started. Ethan rose slowly, valor still looming over Garrett, teeth bared. Then let it come. Valor barked once, sharp and fierce, as if sealing the vow. The barn held its breath. Garrett shivered against the wall, whispering words that clung to the rafters like smoke. You'll hear the engine before you see it, and when you do, you'll know you're already too late. Ethan brushed a hand across Valor's back, grounding himself in the shepherd's steady presence. His voice was low, iron-bound. Whatever's coming, we face it together. Valor's eyes stayed fixed on the doors, ears pricked. The photographs, still scattered across the dirt, stared up in silent accusation. And in the dark hush of the barn, Ethan knew the truth. The network wasn't hiding anymore. It was coming for them. Fog cloaked the back roads outside Raven Hollow, as Ethan guided his squad car through the mist. Headlights carved narrow tunnels in the haze, gravel shifting beneath his tires. Valor sat upright in the passenger seat, taut with anticipation, ears flicking at every sound. Garrett's words echoed in Ethan's mind. "You'll hear the engine before you see it." And then it came. A low growl of machinery drifted through the fog. Not close, not far. Like a predator stalking the night. Ethan's pulse spiked. He cut his headlights, slowing to a crawl. Valor's head snapped up, nose pressed to the windshield, a sharp bark breaking the silence. He knew. "There," Ethan muttered. Through the shifting fog, two high beams pierced the road. A hulking black truck emerged, deliberate and heavy, no plates on its frame. Garrett hadn't lied. Ethan's jaw tightened. His hand slammed the siren switch. Red and blue lights erupted in the mist, painting the trees in violent flashes. The siren's wail split the quiet. The truck hesitated, then roared forward. "Damn it!" Ethan floored the accelerator. Gravel sprayed as the squad car lunged after it. Valor braced against the seat, barking furiously, his voice carrying urgency, command. The chase knifed through the fog. The truck swerved left, tires spitting stones. Ethan followed, the wheel shuddering under his hands. Branches whipped the windshield, skeletal arms clawing at glass. "Not losing them, boy," Ethan growled. The truck fishtailed around a bend. Ethan matched it, skidding dangerously near the ditch before wrenching the car back on track. Valor's body leaned with the motion, steady, unflinching. His eyes locked on the quarry ahead. The siren's cry echoed off the trees, but the truck only pushed harder. Ethan keyed his radio. "Unit 7 in pursuit. Black truck, no plates, northbound Ridge Road. Request immediate backup." Static crackled. No answer. His focus stayed on the truck. The gap shrank. 50 yards, 30, 20. Ethan could see the reinforced rear doors now, bolted shut. His stomach twisted. He knew what they might contain. Suddenly, brake lights flared. The truck slowed hard. Ethan slammed the brakes, tires screaming, smoke pluming. The bumper clipped steel with a screech of metal. Valor barked savagely, snarling at the looming shadow. The truck jolted, then surged forward again, diving onto a side road Ethan barely saw. He yanked the wheel, car lurching so violently his shoulder slammed the door. They barely made the turn. For a moment, the fog swallowed them whole. Then the truck reappeared, cutting deeper into the woods. Branches slapped the car. The road thinned to little more than dirt scars through trees. Ethan pressed harder, rage and resolve fusing as one. Sophie's silence, Daniel Mercer's ghost, Anna Maven's initials, every failure thundered with him. Valor growled low. A soldier's snarl. Then brake lights flared again. This time the truck didn't bolt. It rolled deliberately forward, turning into a narrow path that sank into the trees. Ethan slowed, instincts screaming trap. But he followed. The road wound downward into a hollow. Fog lifted just enough to reveal a cabin squatting at the base of the trees, patched with weathered boards, its porch sagging. Faint smoke curled from a crooked chimney. Weak lamplight glowed in the windows, and parked before it, engine ticking, was the black truck. Ethan killed the siren. Silence fell heavier than the noise had been. He cut the headlights, pulling the car into brush. Valor's growl rumbled steady, low. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered, though his own pulse pounded. Voices drifted from the cabin, muffled, low, indistinct. One deep, commanding, Another nervous. Then, faintly, a cry. A child's. Ethan's throat tightened. He glanced at Valor. The shepherd trembled with restrained energy, eyes blazing. He knew. "All right," Ethan whispered, drawing his weapon. "Time to move." They slipped from the car, crouching into the tree line. Cold air stank of pine, smoke, and damp earth. The closer they crept, the sharper the sounds became. Men's voices, rough laughter, punctuated by muffled sobs. At the edge of the clearing, Ethan crouched behind an oak. The cabin loomed 20 yards away, its lantern shuddering in the night breeze. Shadows shifted across curtains inside, tall figures pacing, and in the corner, the black truck sat, its rear doors locked heavy. Valor pressed close, silent as stone. Then, sharper voices, a barked command, a laugh, a sob, a child. Ethan's jaw clenched. He thought of Sophie, her silence screaming louder than words. Thought of every face in the photographs. His hand brushed Valor's back, steadying them both. "We're going in, boy." The shepherd's ears twitched, body coiled like a spring. Ethan mounted the porch. Each step creaked, lantern light flickering across warped boards. He pressed against the wall, listening. A man's voice inside. Calm, deliberate. "Quiet them down." A sob cut short. Ethan's grip on his gun tightened. He twisted the handle. The latch gave with a click. He shoved the door open. The smell hit first. Smoke, sweat, rot. Weak lamplight spilled across the room. 3 children huddled in a corner, wrists bound, faces streaked with tears. One boy whimpered, the oldest shielding the younger 2 with trembling defiance. And before them stood the man in the suit. Immaculate brown fabric, cold eyes, a smile that never reached them. The same man from the barn. "Officer Cole," he said smoothly. "Busy night." Ethan leveled his weapon. "Step away." "Now." The man's eyes flicked to Valor, who growled deep, teeth flashing. Then back to Ethan. "You shouldn't be here. You think this ends with one girl under a staircase, with a few photographs." His smile thinned. "You've stepped into a war you can't win." Ethan advanced a step. "I don't care about your war. I care about those kids. Move, or I put you down." The man's smile faltered, then returned colder. "You're not listening." The cabin door slammed shut behind Ethan. He spun, heart seizing. The handle rattled uselessly. Locked. From the outside. A trap. The suited man chuckled low. "Welcome to the cage." Valor lunged, teeth snapping inches from the fabric. The man stepped back but didn't flinch. His calm was worse than fear. It was satisfaction. Ethan's gun stayed trained, but his mind raced. The locked door, the children, the shadows outside. Whoever had sealed them in was still there. "Open it," Ethan growled. "Now." The man raised a hand in mock surrender. "Shoot me, and they'll never get out." "Every move has a price, officer." The children whimpered louder, the oldest boy's eyes wide with terror. Valor's growl deepened, vibrating through the floorboards. The suited man's eyes gleamed cold. "You wanted the truth? Then choke on it." Boots crunched outside, more than one pair. Circling, closing in. Ethan's grip tightened. Valor's bark split the air, savage and sharp, echoing like a gunshot. Shadows shifted across the thin curtains. The night had turned. The trap was sprung. The cabin pressed in like a tomb, air thick with smoke and fear. A weak lamp sputtered on the table, shadows crawling across warped boards. Ethan stood with his gun raised, back to the children, his aim locked on the man in the suit. Valor prowled low at his side, growling, his entire body radiating readiness. Behind them, the children huddled tighter, small sobs filling the silence between words. The suited man didn't flinch. His brown suit was immaculate despite the dirt floor, his expression cold, amused. He carried himself as if he controlled the room, not the man with the weapon. "You're out of your depth, Officer Cole," he said, his voice smooth as glass. "You think you've uncovered something. All you've done is brush the surface of a machine bigger than you can imagine." Ethan's aim never wavered. "I don't need to imagine. I've seen the photographs. The barn, the trapdoor, the children." The man smiled faintly. "And what did you think those were? Evidence? Proof? They were breadcrumbs. We leave them to see who dares follow. Most men look away. You kept tugging at the thread." Ethan stepped closer, boots crunching. "Then unravel it. Who's pulling the strings?" "You still think it's who?" The man's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "It's not a gang, not Raven Hollow. We span states, borders. We're not shadows. We're a business. A business built on silence and fear." Valor's bark cracked through the air, sharp and savage. The man glanced at him with disdain. "Even your dog knows I'm right." Ethan's jaw clenched, fury burning. "You call them shipments, transfers, but they're children, and you'll answer for every one of them." The man's smile hardened. "Answer to who? The law?" he chuckled. "We own the law. Judges, sheriffs, even some of the men you work beside." Ethan's throat tightened, but his grip stayed steady. "That's where you're wrong. Because there's one thing you don't own: truth. And once it's out, men like you lose everything." For the first time, a crack flickered in the man's calm. He stepped closer, careful of Valor's rumbling growl. "Truth doesn't matter. Power does. The truck you chased tonight, empty. Bait to draw you here. While you waste time with me, the real work continues." Ethan's pulse hammered. He searched the man's eyes for a lie, but the smug certainty there only fed his rage. "You're lying." "Am I?" the man asked softly. "Do you know how many trucks roll every night? How many roads leave this town? You can't chase them all. For every Sophie Turner you drag from a hole, 10 more vanish into the dark. It's not personal. It's just business." The children whimpered. Ethan didn't look back, but their cries dug into him. Sophie Turner's silence flashed in his mind. Daniel Mercer's face in an old file. Anna Maven's initials on faded fabric. Guilt pressed like a blade, but alongside it, resolve. "You talk about business," Ethan said, voice rough. "But I've seen what's left behind when it fails. I'll drag every one of you into the light." The man's smile died, replaced by ice. "Then you'll die trying. The machine doesn't break. It breaks you." Ethan stepped closer. "Not this time." Valor barked again, defiant, echoing Ethan's vow. The children clung tighter to one another, wide eyes fixed on the storm building in the room. For the first time, the man's composure faltered. He adjusted his cuffs, a small gesture masking unease. "You can point that gun all night. It won't change a thing. You're already too late." Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper, more dangerous than a shout. "Then let's see how much of your machine burns before it reaches me." Outside, boots scraped across the porch. Shadows passed the curtains. The trap was tightening. The suited man's lips curved into venom. Here they come. The machine's teeth. His hand twitched toward his coat. Too fast. Don't, Ethan barked. But Valor was already in motion. The shepherd exploded forward, jaws clamping around the man's arm as it cleared fabric. The snarl shook the walls. The man cried out, stumbling, dragged down by 90 pounds of fury. Ethan slammed him against the wall, shoulder driving into his chest. The lamp rattled, shadows jerking wildly. The children screamed, Sophie's voice sharpest of all. "Valor, hold!" Ethan ordered. The shepherd obeyed with terrifying precision. Grip, crushing but controlled. Growl vibrating through the man's body. Ethan wrenched his free arm behind his back, gun still trained. "Move again, and you don't get another warning." The man writhed. "You don't know what you're doing. You're signing your own death." Ethan shoved harder. "I know exactly what I'm doing." The cuffs snapped shut with a metallic click. Judgment in steel. Valor released at Ethan's command, but stayed close, lips curled, eyes locked on the enemy. The man sagged against the wall, immaculate suit torn and streaked with dust, blood staining his sleeve. Yet his eyes still glittered with mockery. "You think this matters? I'm just a shadow. Cut one down, another takes his place." Ethan ignored him. He turned to the children. 3 trembling faces stared back, filthy, tear-streaked, terrified. And then Sophie moved. She shuffled forward, wrists still bound, hesitation etched in every step. But she didn't reach for Ethan. She reached for Valor. The shepherd stood tall, bristling with tension, but didn't move as her small fingers tangled in the thick fur at his neck. She clung to him, pressing her face into his coat, sobs breaking free. Valor stilled, lowering his head slightly, growl fading into something steady, protective. His dark eyes flicked to Ethan, as if to say, "She's safe with me." Ethan's throat closed. He lowered his gun at last, holstering it with a shaky exhale. He knelt beside her, voice low, steady. "You're safe now. No one's ever going to hurt you again. Not while we're here." Her grip tightened in Valor's fur, and when her eyes lifted, just for a moment, Ethan saw it. Fragile, but real. Hope. The man spat from the corner. "You think saving one child makes you a hero? The others are gone. The machine doesn't stop for you." Ethan rose, jaw steel. "Then I'll tear it apart piece by piece until it does." Valor barked once, sharp, commanding. The sound silenced even the boots outside. The man laughed faintly, bitter. "You don't know how many doors you've opened." Ethan stepped closer, shadow falling over him. "Then I'll walk through everyone." The man leaned back, smile returning faintly, but something flickered in his eyes. Unease. Valor stood tall, Sophie clinging to him like a lifeline. The suited man's venom hung heavy in the air, but the room itself seemed to answer with truth. Ethan and Valor weren't standing alone. The machine might be vast, but tonight, in a smoke-stained cabin, they had lit the first spark. And Ethan knew with certainty, this war was only beginning. The precinct was hushed when Ethan pushed through the doors, dawn's gray light still bleeding across the streets outside. Fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, and the corridors smelled of stale coffee and dust. But in the briefing room, the quiet felt different, charged, heavy with truth. The oak table groaned under the weight of files, photographs, and scraps of evidence pulled from barns, cabins, and trapdoors. Yellowed reports from years ago sat beside fresh notes scrawled in haste. Faces of missing children stared up from the mess, smiling in photographs that time had turned into gravestones. Clara Hayes stood at the head, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched into her face. Daniel Price leaned on his forearms, his broad frame sagging as if bracing against a storm. At the far corner sat Sophie, wrapped in a blanket, a pencil trembling in her hand. She hadn't spoken much, but she drew, her fragile lines the only sound cutting through the silence. Valor lay curled at her side, ears flicking at every creak, his warm body anchoring her small hand that tangled in his fur. Ethan set a stack of photographs on the table. His voice was steady, but low. This is everything from the barn and the cabin. Faces. Names. If she can help us connect them, we might have a map. Clara softened her tone. Sweetheart, can you show us what you remember? Sophie's eyes darted up, uncertain. Then the pencil scratched across the paper. Angular lines formed a gaunt face, scar down the jaw. Ethan's chest tightened. Daniel muttered, almost to himself, Marcus Hale. Clara's jaw hardened. Then this isn't hidden in the woods. It's rooted in Raven Hollow. Another drawing took shape. Slick hair, sharp suit, hollow eyes. Ethan knew before she finished. The man in the cabin, the one who had called it a machine. Sophie's whisper was thin, cracking the silence. They said I wasn't supposed to see. Ethan crouched by her chair, his voice gentle. But you did. And because of that, we can stop them. You're braver than you know. Her eyes met his for a heartbeat, then dropped again to the page. Clara pinned the sketches to the corkboard, adding lines between photos and maps. A web formed, each pin circling closer around Raven Hollow. Barns and cabins were just throats, she said. The lungs are bigger. The real power sits here. The room went still. Everyone felt it. The shadow wasn't outside. It was in their town. By mid-morning, the web had thickened. Ledgers, receipts, permits, and fuel cards lay scattered like confetti from decades of lies. Clara pulled sheets from a banker's box. Municipal forms, invoices, innocuous slips of paper turned sinister when cross-checked. They counted on no one caring enough to look, she said flatly. Ethan traced the symbols in the margins, triangles, dots, stars, codes. Because names make noise, he murmured. Daniel found a fuel statement. 90 gallons filled once a month. No plates listed. His voice was bitter. Black truck. Unmarked. Valor's ears twitched, as if memory itself had stirred his muscles. The names followed. Councilman Arlen McKinnon, a judge who delayed warrants, a contractor with idle snowplows, a retired school officer, a freight broker 2 counties out. Faces folks had trusted at pancake breakfasts. Clara's marker drew connections on the board until the conspiracy stopped looking like rumor and started looking like process. Intake coordinator, she said, tapping McKinnon's name. He steers the sightlines. The judge tamped motions. Hale stamped movement. And this, she lifted an invoice for refrigeration units billed to a defunct butcher's co-op. Kept it all cold. Daniel paced the window, his jaw tight. Sunday sermons, town picnics, and all along we were living next to a ledger. Sophie sketched again, slower this time. A rectangle with double doors, trucks lined up beneath a lamplight. Above, 3 small circles for eyes peering through a window. Ethan crouched beside her. Where was this? She pointed with her pencil. The one with the ramp. Clara's breath caught. Route 17 Way Station. It's been temporarily staffed for years. Perfect blind spot. Daniel straightened. We put eyes there. Quiet ones. No lights, no sirens. Ethan nodded, palms flat on the table. We don't chase every road, we cut an artery. At 17. His words settled over the room like a vow. Clara capped her marker. Daniel checked his watch. Vala lay at Sophie's side, chin on her knee, steady as stone. But the logistics faded from Ethan's mind when he saw Sophie again. The blanket slipping from her shoulder. Graphite smudges on her fingers. Her head pressed into Vala's fur, drifting between sleep and wake. He crossed the room quietly, crouched, and offered her a clean handkerchief. You've done more than anyone could have asked. Her wide eyes lifted, uncertain, caught between fear and fragile trust. Ethan kept his voice low. You don't have to be afraid anymore. Not with us. Not with him. Her trembling hand slipped from Vala's ruff and touched his wrist. Barely a brush, but enough. Fire shot through Ethan's chest, burning away years of ghosts. He turned his hand over, letting her small fingers rest in his palm. You're safe, he whispered. You've got me. You've got Clara. Daniel. And you've got him. Vala huffed softly, pressing closer against Sophie as if sealing the promise. Clara stopped writing. Daniel turned from the window. Neither spoke. They just watched as Sophie's shoulders loosened, the first sliver of safety creeping back into her small frame. Ethan's knees ached, but he didn't move. He stayed because she hadn't let go. They took too much from you, Sophie. But they don't get to take your future. Not while I still draw breath. Her grip tightened. And in her eyes, fragile but real, flickered something he hadn't seen since the night he pulled her out from the dark. Hope. Vala's tail gave one slow thump against the tile, a benediction. Ethan rose at last, his voice steel. We cut at 17. The map of Raven Hollow pulsed with red string and black ink, a heart exposed on the wall. Outside, the town wore its daylight face, shop doors propped open, clock tower chiming noon. Inside, on a scarred oak table, the truth had finally been named. And as Sophie leaned into Vala's fur, her small hand still tangled in his, Ethan Cole knew the war had only begun. But this time, he wasn't fighting alone. The first light of morning slipped through the blinds of Raven Hollow's precinct, washing the walls in pale gold. It was the kind of light that softened even the sharpest corners, hinting at renewal, as though the night's horrors could be brushed aside with the rising sun. Ethan rose from the chair where he had sat most of the night, his body stiff, his mind raw. He looked toward the far end of the room where Sophie still dozed, curled against Vala's flank. The shepherd had not moved for hours, his breath steady, his chest rising and falling like a lullaby that held her in fragile safety. As the dawn stretched higher, Ethan bent down, brushing a hand gently against Sophie's shoulder. Hey, he murmured. It's morning. Her eyes blinked open slowly, uncertain at first, like she wasn't sure whether she had woken into safety or another nightmare. But when she saw Vala, head lifting, ears pricking forward, eyes fixed on her, she let out a shaky breath and nodded. She reached instinctively for the shepherd's fur, clinging as she rose. Clara stood by the doorway, her notepad in hand, exhaustion written deep into her face. Daniel leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his jaw set in grim determination. Both had been there all night, combing through evidence, preparing the next steps. But now, as Sophie shuffled forward with Ethan and Vala at her side, they stepped back, giving space. Ethan opened the station's front door. The hinges groaned, then swung wide to reveal a world washed clean by light. The cobblestone streets of Raven Hollow gleamed damp with dew. The maple trees along Main Street stood quiet, their leaves glistening as though they had been bathed in firelight. Sophie paused at the threshold, her bare feet hesitant on the cold tile. She squinted at the brightness, clutching Valor's collar as if afraid the sun itself might betray her. "Come on," Ethan whispered, extending his hand. She took it, tentative at first, then firmer, and stepped into the morning. Valor walked close on her other side, his tail brushing her leg, his body angled protectively, as though guarding her from the very air. The three of them walked slowly down the precinct's steps. The world around them was waking. A shopkeeper raised a shutter. A milk truck rattled past. A dog barked faintly in the distance. Ordinary sounds, ordinary life. But for Sophie, each noise seemed to pull her attention, her eyes darting, her shoulders stiff. Ethan knelt once they reached the sidewalk. He tipped his head to catch her gaze. "You're not alone. Not now. Not ever again. Look." He pointed to the horizon. Beyond the rooftops, the sun broke fully, spilling warm gold across Raven Hollow. For a moment the town, usually cloaked in grey, looked almost new. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, catching in the light. Birds wheeled overhead, their wings catching fire in the sky. Sophie's lips trembled, then faint. So faint, it could have been mistaken for a flicker of the dawn itself. Her mouth curved upward, a smile. Small, fragile, but real. Ethan felt something crack open in his chest, a weight shifting that he hadn't realized he'd carried since Mercer's disappearance years ago. This was what hope looked like. A child who had survived, smiling again, even if only a little. Valor leaned into Sophie's side, pressing his head against her hip. She bent instinctively, both hands sinking into his fur. He looked up at her with steady, loyal eyes, and in that gaze, she seemed to draw strength. Daniel's voice carried softly from the steps behind them. "Looks like she finally believes you, Cole." Clara folded her arms, her tone gentler than usual. "It's not just belief. It's trust. Hard won." She glanced at Ethan. "Don't let her down." Ethan rose, his hand still clasped around Sophie's. "I won't," he said simply. The promise wasn't just for Sophie. It was for all the names on the board, all the children still missing, all the shadows left to drag into the light. They began walking again, down the street washed in gold. As Sophie clung tightly to Valor, her shoulders straighter now, her steps less hesitant. The townsfolk who stirred early, shopkeepers, paperboys, men on their way to the mill, paused to look, curiosity stirring. They didn't know the story yet, but they felt it. Something had shifted in Raven Hollow. Ethan knew the fight was far from over. The network still pulsed beneath the surface, its roots tangled deep in the town's soil. But as he watched Sophie smile faintly into the sunrise, he felt a clarity sharpen inside him. They had struck the first blow. And that was enough to keep moving forward. The sun had risen fully over Raven Hollow when the black SUVs rolled into town. Their engines purred low, heavy with authority, their polished surfaces catching the new light in hard, angular flashes. Federal plates glinted, and as the doors opened, men and women in tailored suits stepped out with the precision of a drill line. The people of the town paused in their routines, milk crates half carried, newspapers half folded, to watch as strangers in dark glasses and crisp jackets moved with unhurried purpose toward the precinct. Ethan stood on the steps, with Valor pressed close to his side. Sophie clung to the shepherd's thick coat, her small face half hidden in his fur, peeking out with wide, fearful eyes. Clara and Daniel flanked Ethan, their postures tense. They all knew this moment was inevitable. What they hadn't known was how heavy it would feel. The man in the suit, still cuffed, though he carried himself as if the steel were merely jewelry, was led out by 2 federal agents. His once pristine attire had lost some of its sharpness overnight, but his bearing hadn't. He walked with his head high, shoulders back, as though this were not an arrest, but a coronation. His eyes swept the street, lingered on Ethan, then drifted to Sophie. That smirk curved his lips again, poisonous in its calm. "You've made quite a mess," he said, his voice loud enough to carry to where Ethan stood. His tone was conversational, almost friendly, as if they were 2 colleagues talking over morning coffee. "Dragged things into the light that were never meant to be seen." Valor growled low, the sound reverberating through Sophie's small frame. She pressed closer to him, her fingers tightening, but she didn't look away. One of the agents pushed the suited man forward, but he resisted just enough to slow the pace. "It won't matter," he continued, his gaze never leaving Ethan. "Because you've started something you can't finish. You've declared a war you cannot win." Ethan clenched his fists at his sides. Every instinct screamed to silence the man, to end the taunting before it burrowed deeper into Sophie's fragile heart. But he held steady, his eyes locked on the prisoner. "You'll answer for what you've done," he said. His voice was quiet, steady, carrying the weight of every promise he'd ever made to a victim who never lived to see justice. The man only laughed, low, cruel, hollow. "Justice?" He tilted his head, the morning light carving shadows across his sharp cheekbones. "Justice is a word men like you use to make themselves feel taller in a world built by men like me. You think Raven Hollow is unique? You think this ends here? No. This town is a whisper in a choir. Cut one voice, the song goes on." Clara took a step forward, her jaw set. "Then we'll silence every voice until there's nothing left to sing." The man's smile sharpened. "I look forward to watching you try." The agents yanked him toward the waiting SUV, finally forcing his eyes away from Ethan. But even as he was shoved into the back seat, his presence seemed to linger, a stain on the air. When the door slammed shut, the sound rang like a gavel, not an ending, but a warning. The convoy pulled away, tires crunching on gravel, the dark vehicles vanishing into the brightening day. Yet the menace remained, hanging over Main Street like smoke after a fire. The people who had gathered began to disperse, muttering to themselves, glancing over shoulders as though the shadows had grown teeth. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hand brushing against Valor's neck. The shepherd leaned into him, steady as stone. Sophie lifted her face from the dog's fur, her eyes glassy but clear. He won't come back," she whispered. Ethan knelt down to meet her gaze. He placed a hand gently over hers, where it clutched Valor's coat. "Not him," he said firmly. "Not ever. Again." He hesitated, then added with honesty that felt like both steel and burden. "But others will try. That's why we stay ready. That's why we don't stop." Sophie's lips trembled, but she nodded, as if his words, though frightening, were better than lies. Valor licked her hand, and for the first time that morning, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. Behind them, Clara spoke low to Daniel. He wasn't bluffing. That wasn't theater. There are more, and they're watching. Daniel's reply was grim. Then let them watch. They'll see we're not backing down. Ethan straightened, his eyes following the retreating convoy, until it disappeared into the horizon. The suited man's words echoed in his skull. A war you cannot win. But as he looked down at Sophie, fragile yet standing, scarred yet still capable of smiling, he felt the ember of defiance burn hotter. Maybe the war couldn't be won in a day, or a week, or even a year. Maybe it would outlast them all. But he knew one thing with certainty. He would fight it every step, with valor at his side and the memory of Sophie's faint sunrise smile as his compass. The menace lingered, but so did resolve. And in Raven Hollow, where silence had once hidden cruelty, voices had begun to rise. The night settled over Raven Hollow like a blanket of ash. Crickets chirped faintly in the fields beyond town, but on Ethan's porch there was only silence, the kind that came not from peace, but from exhaustion. The boards beneath his boots creaked as he leaned back in the old rocking chair, the wood groaning with each slow sway. Valor lay stretched at his feet, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, ears flicking at every whisper of the night. His head rested on his paws, but his eyes stayed open, watching the dark street ahead, as if the shadows themselves might stir. Ethan's gaze drifted across the town he had spent years protecting. Raven Hollow looked deceptively calm beneath the moonlight. Porch lamps glowed like little sentinels, and curtains shifted as neighbors settled into their evening routines. To a stranger, it might have seemed like any quiet town. But Ethan knew better now. He knew the rot beneath the paint, the network of power and betrayal that had fed on silence for far too long. He reached down, brushing his fingers lightly against Valor's thick fur. The shepherd shifted slightly, lifting his head to press it against Ethan's knee. That silent touch was grounding, steadying, a reminder that even in the darkest currents, he was not alone. "You did good, boy," Ethan murmured. His voice was low, worn by the weight of the day. Better than anyone could have asked. Valor gave a quiet huff, as though acknowledging the words without pride, only certainty. Then he lowered his head again, his eyes never leaving the street. Ethan's thoughts turned to Sophie. He could still see her fragile smile at sunrise, the way she had clutched Valor as if holding on to the last solid thing in the world. That faint curve of her lips had been enough to pierce the shadows, but he knew her journey had only begun. Healing would come slowly, scar by scar. He had promised she wouldn't be alone, and he meant it. That promise would shape everything that came next. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped loosely. His eyes narrowed at the horizon, where the night sky bled into darker hills. Somewhere beyond those hills, the man in the suit sat in federal custody, smirking even as he wore chains. His warning echoed still. "You've started a war you can't win." Ethan's jaw tightened. Maybe it was true that the network stretched further than they could see. Maybe there were names hidden behind titles, faces veiled by wealth and influence. But wars weren't won in a single night. They were fought step by step, breath by breath, through persistence as relentless as the tide. He straightened in his chair, the weight of resolve settling into him. The kind of resolve that didn't burn hot like fire, but steady like embers that refused to die. "This is only the beginning," he said aloud. The words carried on the night air. Valor's ears twitched. The shepherd shifted, sitting up now, his body tall and alert beside Ethan. He let out a low growl, not of fear, but of vigilance, as if echoing his handler's vow. Together, they stared into the darkness, two figures bound by scars, by service, by loyalty unshaken. A breeze stirred the trees along Main Street, rustling the leaves like whispers. Somewhere in that wind, Ethan imagined the voices of the children whose names had been pinned on the map, lost, silenced, waiting for someone to keep fighting. He felt them in the stillness, like a chorus asking not for vengeance, but for truth. And he answered them in his heart. We're not done. Not until every shadow is dragged into the light. The town clock struck 9, the chimes ringing clear across Raven Hollow. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, letting the sound settle him. When he opened them again, he saw not just the streets and houses, but the battlefield they had become. It wasn't lined with trenches or smoke. It was lined with secrecy, paper trails, smiles at Sunday service, and he would walk it every day until the war was finished. Beside him, Valor lifted his head higher, his profile sharp against the porch light. His eyes were fixed on the road, as if daring the night to move against them. He was more than a dog. He was a sentinel, a survivor, a partner whose silence carried the weight of words Ethan could never say. The rocking chair stilled. Ethan sat forward, his hand finding Valor's collar, gripping it with quiet strength. Together, they faced the dark, and in that vigil was both closure and foreboding. Raven Hollow slept, but its shadows had not vanished. The war waited beyond the horizon. And on that porch, beneath the tired glow of a single lamp, a man and his dog kept watch, two guardians bound by loyalty, ready for what would come next. In the end, what lingers isn't just the mystery or the danger, it's the quiet image of a German shepherd keeping watch by someone's side. Dogs like Valor remind us that loyalty isn't complicated. It's steady, patient, and often stronger than we deserve. They carry our burdens without complaint, share our silence without judgment, and remind us that even in the darkest places, love can still be a guiding light. If this story stirred something in you, maybe it's a nudge to spend a little more time with your own four-legged companion. I've found comfort in simple resources that deepen the bond. Gentle training tips, health insights, even stories from other dog lovers who understand how much these animals give us. No pressure, just something I personally found meaningful. Cherish your dog tonight. Scratch behind their ears, whisper the words they already know, and let them feel how much they matter. In the end, it's those small, quiet gestures of love that stay with us the longest.